And so one of the foundations of Steve's thinking back about a decade ago was that startups operate a totally different way from the way established businesses operate. Right? Established businesses began to be taught how to operate in 1908 when Harvard granted the first Masters of Business Administration. It was all about a program for running an established business where you had customers, you had competitors, you had channels, you understood lots of the elements of your business. And established businesses focused on executing against a plan. We had 83 customers this year. We're going to get to 100. We're going to do that by beating Oracle or beating SAP or doing this or adding these features or whatever. You could build and execute a plan because you knew what was going on in your market. You knew who your customers were, who your competitors' customers were, and so forth. And so fundamental rule number one in the difference between startups and established businesses is on day one as your startup, you are beginning a search to find all those elements that make your business potentially a successful business. And that means, on a search, things are unpredictable and so forth. And we used to launch this search with a document that looked like this, the business plan. Right? Steve and I are on a crusade to move business plan writing to the university department where it truly belongs, that being the creative writing department. Because between the covers of this, usually 50 pages, it's usually beautiful margins and typesetting and headlines and fonts and diagrams. And at the back, 5 spreadsheets. And the 5th spreadsheet, the far right column, somehow always comes out to 100 million plus or minus in revenue, 15, 18, 20 million dollars in pre-tax profit. The far right column on the last spreadsheet. Why is that? Because that's what venture investors need to see to write you a check. They need to believe that this business can get to $100 million. So you fill the covers of this business plan with fairy tales, including, I know exactly how many customers I'm going to have in the second quarter of 2014 and what my marketing spend will be in the first quarter of 14 to get them, how many salespeople I'll have in the second half of 2015, how my margin will change over time. It's all fairy tales. Let's leave it at that. And once you've completed those fairy tales, you go to board meetings and you talk about why you never meet any of the numbers in the forecast. And if you're truly honest with your investor, you say, well, we didn't really know those numbers or mean them. We put them in there because if they weren't that big, you never would have invested. And so one of the early ideas in a better way to build a startup was to forget the business plan entirely until you can put facts between the covers rather than fiction. The way you do that is by testing every element of your startup with the only people who matter, your customers, right? Your professor's opinions don't matter, my opinions don't matter, your investors' opinions don't matter. The only opinions that do matter are the opinions of people who might give you money someday, not as investors, but as buyers of your product or service. Because, unfortunately, you can print thousands of copies of your business plan and staple one to every can of peas you sell, to every package of software you sell, and tell your customers to read it. And on page 8, it's going to say, they will buy this, they'll buy 20 seats, and they'll renew every year, and they'll pay for upcharge. It's all fairy tales. Customers don't do what they're told, and they certainly don't read your business plan. And if you look at some of the most recent just sort of horrible failures of companies, I mean, can you imagine the board meeting at RIM just a year or two ago? Why would anybody want their music and their email on the same device. Oh, nobody's ever going to type on glass. That's ridiculous. Color screens? You don't need color in your email. Right? RIM declared victory, stopped talking to its customers, and the customers obviously stopped talking to them. We've seen the same thing at Zynga. Webvan, which we talk about at length in the book, was probably the most public and colossal failure. Webvan went public before the product launched, spent $2.6 billion building automated warehouses all over the United States. Why? Because the business plan said 70% of all of their customers would purchase from Webvan every week. They had that number kind of backwards. It was 17%. And instead of the orders increasing week over week, they were declining week over week. And so by the time Webvan signed its $2.6 billion warehouse contract, it was already on the way to one of the biggest, most public bankruptcies of all time. Where do you get the time to do this search? You take the 2 months you usually spend writing this beautiful business plan. But if you start on day one, assuming that what you have are a lot of hypotheses, a lot of guesses, and your job from day one forward is to figure out whether those guesses are fact or fiction, you look at your startup in a totally different way. Right? The way we built startups as recently as the mid-90s was go raise a pile of money because you have a great idea, a beautiful, nicely formatted business plan, and you could say somewhere in that business plan, it's only fact. This is a $1 billion market opportunity, and if we only get 2% of that market opportunity, boy, are we going to be rich. There are two facts. And investors in the 90s would write you a $3 or $5 or $50 million check, depending on the opportunity and the team and the experience and so forth. Those days are over. Now investors write checks when they see traction. And it's your job as the entrepreneur to get your business to repeatable, scalable, profitable as quickly as you can. And the sooner you do that, the more equity you preserve for yourselves and your founding team. Right? If you can take a third, a quarter, half of the risk out of your startup by proving demand for it, enthusiasm for it, go-to-market strategy, and other things, your valuation will go up, and $1 from an investor will buy less equity in your company, leaving more for you. In Bogota, Colombia, where I teach more than occasionally, in an 8-week program with 25 startup teams funded by the government of Colombia, and all of these teams are making totally legal products that can walk right by customs dogs anytime. 25 startup teams, 8 weeks. The end of the 8th week, 8 of the teams had customer revenue. One of the B2C companies had 315 consumer transactions. One of the B2B companies had a $50,000 purchase order in hand from a major corporation for enterprise software. The same 8 weeks you normally spend writing, proofreading, formatting your business plan.